Jameen, thanks very much for your time. So the rand continues to take a beating on the back of the president's announcement yesterday, but the president also says this is the done thing around the world. What do you reckon?
Yes, it is the done thing. In fact, there are only 7 central banks around the world who are not nationalized. The problem, and really it's not going to make a huge difference to the way in which the Reserve Bank actually operates. That is the reality. But the perception amongst investors overseas is that this kind of move, when combined with the moves towards expropriating land without compensation, are examples of the way in which the government is becoming ever more interventionist, and they are obviously perceiving that this is the thin end of the wedge to interference in the way in which monetary policy operates. Ramaphosa denies that, but the perception is that the government is going to try and force the Reserve Bank to reduce interest rates when they don't want to, and that in turn could mean higher inflation. But it is important to note that the rand has fallen not only because of this reason. The dollar has been extremely strong on markets in the past 24 hours because the European Central Bank came out with a report saying that they believe European growth will be even weaker than previously anticipated, and so money moved towards the dollar. And then in addition, the decision by NERSA to grant much lower tariff increases on electricity than Eskom had requested means that the amount that Eskom is going to have to borrow from the government is going to be far greater than they had hoped, and that in turn could jeopardize the government's ability to retain current credit ratings on South African government bonds.
So, Dr. Jameen, you're saying it's a whole host of different factors that are sort of coming down on the rand at the same time.
There's also a technical thing. It broke through a trend line, and so psychologically people are selling it. But I think the most important factor that actually simulated the really big fall was the statement of nationalization of the bank.
And the question around that, is it whether or not the bank will still be able to maintain independence after nationalization?
That is the fear amongst international investors. I'm fairly confident that I don't think it's neither here nor there. I think the ANC is doing this purely for electoral purposes because the EFF has been calling for this, and so the ANC is pulling the rug from under the feet of the EFF in this regard. But I don't believe that it will necessarily in any way see greater interference in the conduct of monetary policy. But that is the perception in the markets, that it could just do so. I don't believe that that will be the case.
Dr. Jameen, while we have you on the line, let's talk about that tariff increase granted to Eskom by NERSA. You're saying that the rand, in part, is taking a beating because NERSA didn't give Eskom exactly what it was asking for. But the beating on consumers, I think South Africans would, of course, have been hoping and praying yesterday, just before that decision was announced, that in fact it wouldn't have been 8%, never mind the 15, 16, 70%.
Consumers mustn't fool themselves. In the budget, the government came in with a bailout package of 23 billion rand for each of the next 3 years, which comes to 69 billion rand of extra bailout of Eskom. That in turn has forced the government to increase the tax burden on consumers quite sharply. They may not they may not see that as being the case, but surreptitiously through bracket creep, letting people's salaries rise and not adjusting tax brackets, that in turn is going to see a huge increase in the tax burden of consumers. So the choice is heads you lose, tails you lose. Either you accept a very big increase in electricity tariffs or you pay more taxes. And what is happening now is the latter rather than the former.
But I mean, consumers will argue that Eskom is in this position not because of the doing of any of the consumers, but because of really, really poor management decisions and corruption, as we've heard come out of the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. Why do we have to foot the bill?
Well, the fact is, who is going to foot the bill? Eskom is owned, but basically controlled by the government, and we are taxpayers paying the government. So if government is inefficient and corrupt, then we have to pay the penalty, and this is what it amounts to. And we may not be paying the penalty now in terms of much higher electricity tariffs, but we are paying the penalty in terms of much higher tax rates than would effective tax burdens than would otherwise have been the case.
Yeah, it's like you say, heads you lose, tails you lose. Thanks very much for your time. Some sobering analysis there from economist Dr. Azar Jameen.